an announcement that goes out. Give it a couple minutes to register what's going on. All right, we're 15 seconds in. I think that's good. So, hello, welcome to the Celestic Intelligence podcast. My name is Amelie, and I am the host and creator of Celestic Intelligence podcast. And we are on an arc towards really opening and expanding our beings into be able to what I like to call time traveling, but really just become super integrated with ourselves and then be able to travel out beyond ourselves as well. Reposition this so it's not so wobbly and bothering me. Okay. So, like I said, we've been on this arc. First was really setting a foundation. Get my notes up. Can I make it big? Okay, there we go. So we started by setting a foundation, really diving into our identity or identities and inner governance, really being able to tune in to what's going on inside, okay? Who's making the decisions and practicing your own agency and knowing when you're giving your agency away. Um, we do it a lot, and maybe we don't even know that we're doing it. But I started, I think it was in the episode 50s. So if you are interested in that, go to sovereign interiority, go into essence, multiplicity, which is having all of these different identities and roles that we integrate into our beings, and then moving from survival adaptation into something beyond survival, really just being integrated as a whole into yourself, okay? So we're removing that fragmentation and we're going into an emotional, mental, spiritual, and identity literacy about what's going on in here. Okay. And then we move to structure. We need to have a container that is going to help stabilize us, really becoming one with ourselves so that we have something grounded to return to when we're going out and being different identities, or we're going out and maybe you are a time traveler and you need to have a space to come back, not in a dissociative way, but a space to come back to who you are in order for you basically not to fragment your psyche. All right. So we're doing that with knowing what our nervous system is saying. We're doing that with clean exchange of agreements, knowing, if we're having clean agreements with people, having clean agreements with our workspace, having clean agreements um, with our money, being really clear about all of the things that we're doing and being really clear with the way that we speak. And then also being very responsible about ourselves. What am I responsible for? Am I assuming my responsibility? Okay. We're not stepping into a spiritual bypass. We're not saying, oh, the world doesn't matter. All I need to be is up here, because that's not a whole integrated. We're trying to be whole, holy, but with the WHOLLY. We're trying to be a whole person here. And then really looking at money or just the monetary exchanges as our spiritual mirror of what is my money saying about me. So I've been doing this like really intensely ever since I did that Pluto in versus the financial systems, because our financial systems right now are going through a huge shift, a huge change. We're going from really being on the dollar to now integrating this cryptocurrency, and now other forms of currencies are going to start popping up, because not everybody's going to want to do cryptocurrency. People are going to want to do peer-to-peer exchange and everything like that. So that's what that's all about. So now, hello, MD Rofik. I'm doing well. Happy Memorial Day if you're in America. I have a day off today. And I went and did a 6 a.m. workout, and I got back and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta hurry up and get ready for my podcast. And then I was like, oh, the podcast is at 9, and it was like 4 minutes till 8. And I was like, oh, I got an extra time, an extra hour. That's great. But I'm doing well. Thank you. And so now that when you set that structure, now you're able to really play with movement and time. Okay. And that's really what we're getting into here. Now, last week I was talking about thresholds, closure, initiation, and coming up to that threshold moment. So right now in America, maybe across the globe, we're coming into this really deep threshold moment of um of we don't know what's going to happen on the other side. So there's this feeling of collapse, that things are going to collapse. And there's different times in history where this has happened. The fall of Rome. So when Rome fell, there was a huge collapse because Rome could not stabilize in the way that it was interacting in the world. How are your two dubs? Two dubs. I don't know what that means, MD Rofik. Hello, Sasha. Welcome. So, the fall of Rome is really like this moment where we can go look back in history and what happened there. And so there was definitely this instability that was going on, and then closure. So there was a lot of what happened after that is kind of what we're going to be experiencing. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I just know that, as we're coming up to the precipice, the threshold, the closure of systems, now we're going to see new things open. And this is the initiation period. This is that threshold period where you're kind of sitting in limbo in between one system and a new other system that you don't even know what it's going to look like. All right. So it's a really unique moment in time and in history, because we're talking about time right now, where we're learning how to go through that unknown liminal moment and then into the next phase. So, with the arc that I have, we started with foundation. Now we're at, then we finished structure, and now we're at the direction. Where are we going? And one of the things that I want to bring up, and the things that this is what I'm interested in, just my intellectual mind gets going, is we are in a what is called a Jubilee year this year. So in 2026, it's a Jubilee year, and other religions, I think they may look at it as last year, but last year to this year, we're just kind of in this Jubilee moment. Okay. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And then tomorrow, with my normal podcast time on Tuesdays. Do you speak Bengali? I do not. I speak English. Um, so I don't know any Bengali. Okay, so Jubilee Consciousness is what the title of the episode is today. So it's episode number 68. Tomorrow is going to be on retrocausality, which is a quantum look at how time and movement interact with us. Okay, so really, we're just learning, how is my being interacting with the world. All right, let me just drum up my notes here. Oh, yeah, here we go. I like it when the notes are just right there for you. So 2026 is a special Jubilee year, all right? And if we go back in time, so 50 years ago would be another Jubilee year. That would have been 1976. 50 years before that would have been 1926. And if you keep on going, 50 years ago, so 250 years ago, it was 1776, and there was a lot going on in that moment. So I kind of went back to 1726 to really just build on what's been going on, what are the patterns, because I love looking at historical patterns and seeing what is making sense here. Okay. But first, I just want to talk about what is Jubilee and what would Jubilee consciousness be. Okay. So, what it really is Jubilee was set up as a release, a restoration, and this end of these loops that were going on. So, like when things become unstable and there's a lot of instability, there has to be some form of release. And so these Jubilee years are looked upon as this release year. All right. So, my first question is, what if history in cycles of accumulation, they're doing all that accumulation and then there's a release? How does that work on civilizations, economies, identities, and even souls? Because right now we're in this really unique threshold moment, as not just as a society, just as a global human population. We're in this really unique position. So what if these civilizations, economics, identities, periodically reach these threshold moments where the old structure is unable to hold it? Now, throughout the arc of what I've been talking about, I'm looking at individually on a micro level, how is this working out? Okay. So we're looking at all of these things on a micro level. And now, since we're doing movement, we're starting to expand outside of our beings and really applying the techniques and the lessons that we've been talking about for the last, I think, 14 episodes, 14 streams of, um, how do we implant structure into our own lives so that it's a new structure that's able to stabilize our own self and our own identity. And now that we've really ground that down into ourselves, now we can look outside of ourselves and apply it to our city state or our town or whatever, our states, our country, and then ultimately the whole realm wide, applying it to that, what's going on. And then you can start processing those signals and really getting an idea of where are we. Okay. But when we reach that threshold point and that old structure is now unstable and it can't continue any longer, that is the spirit of what Jubilee is. Okay. So Jubilee is not just religion or a cause for celebration or some ritual. It really is a reset. It's a reset principle that has to happen. These cycles even are 1 through 9. So we're in a 1 year right now, or a 10 year. We just closed with our 9 year last year. So 2025 equals 9. If you add all the numbers together, that's a 9 year. And then 2026 is 10, or people will break it down to 1. So we're starting a new cycle. Well, the same principle applies with the Jubilee. It's just a longer cycle. Okay. Um, and it's very much a biblical, and so there is religion around it. And there is a certain set of rituals and celebration around it. However, the whole idea behind it is that it is a reset principle. So we're resetting. It's also restoring. It's a restoration principle as well, because we need that release after prolonged burdens. And so this Jubilee is this really beautiful archetype to kind of help move that, and release the tension that's going on. So it's not just a reset, a restoration, it's also this threshold principle of when you get to that threshold, there has to be some form of break. And if you really listen to what's going on in the world, like a lot of the times I'm listening, I'm scrolling through and I'm listening, like, what are people saying? What are people saying? How are they feeling? And, I'm scrolling through my reels, and, some of it is very facade, but you can kind of start digging in and saying, oh, okay, people are feeling this type of way. Or even like in Reddit, you can see how people respond in Reddit of, they're responding to certain things. I'm a part of different groups on Facebook, and so I'm listening to what are people saying, what are the women talking about, what are the men talking about. And there's a lot of people that are just like, I don't like people, I don't want to be around them. um, I was born into the worst timeline. uh, and this is what they're saying to themselves in their lives. um, what am I, what's the other thing? A lot of people are single and living this single life where they're just isolated from people, and that's like lauded as like a, kind of, look how cool I am doing that. um and really, when I'm looking at that, I'm like, okay, we're really in this threshold moment. We're really trying to figure out what's my identity now. And so that's part of this core premise of what Jubilee consciousness is. Okay, so um Jubilee appears most explicitly in Abrahamic tradition. So think Old Testament, but versions of this will appear globally. The recurring theme of Jubilee is release, restoration, balance correction. Oh, hello, son, Joshi. How are you today? I hope you had your vegetables. Balance correction, ending cycles of extraction. So I think it's in Japan, where like certain areas of land will be untouched. They'll like go and, pull resources from that land, and then for a period of time it's just untouched. They let it just kind of go wild, and then they'll focus on a different area. So very much land is getting a little bit of rest here as well. And then renewal after excess accumulation. So, if you're like starting to get a lot of stuff, like right now, I would imagine, just with the way that our finances are as Americans, and we have this huge debt bubble, a growing, debt, national debt. There's excess accumulation that's occurring in that debt, that at some point it's going to break. And a lot of people, correspond on this, and they're like, the debt bubble is gonna be blah blah blah. We saw that debt bubble kind of pop a little bit in 2008, when there was what was called the Great Recession. Is, a lot of people were getting loans that they couldn't afford. um, ARMS, which is an adjustable rate mortgage, where they go and buy a house, they get in, and then the the percent is low for their home loan, but because it's an adjustable rate, that as soon as that rate goes up a point or two, then all of a sudden they can't afford their homes, and then the debt bubble of the mortgage situation, so the housing situation, blows up. And then we have bank bailouts and all this stuff. And so those are little mechanisms that they're trying to like put this structure together, but you can see the instability of this situation, how it's starting to leak out of like housing costs go up, it's harder to get a home, all that kind of stuff. So um, when we look at Jubilee, it really is this like release point, like something has to release, something has to release. So in Judaism, which is the original Jubilee, every 50th year was a Jubilee. How to learn English. Oh, hi, Queen of Eagles. Read first message, ma'am. Oh, I don't see the first message. I just see hello, mom. Learn how to learn English. Ma'am asked me question for you. Are you sure? I don't know what's going on. Okay. So in Judaism, every 50th year was a jubilee. This is a moment when debts were released. So if somebody had a debt, it was completely cleaned. Like, and it wasn't just people. This is like debts were cleared. Um, Land was returned to the families. Like slavery was normal. It was more of a you're in servitude, serving, for a family until you met the 7 years was another. Um, I'm not going to call it Jubilee, but it was just like a debt release year. Like, okay, you've paid your debt 7 years now, and we still have that in our system here. If you are part of the if you have credit and you have things on your credit and it's been on there for 7 years, those eventually just go away. So unless you're like paying off your debts and you're able to do that after 7 years, that's when the debt is released. And that's where that principle comes from. Okay. So land was returned to the original families. Indentured servants were freed. So, after the 7 years, or if it was a jubilee year, the indentured servants would be freed, and then the land was allowed to rest. So you gave the land a rest period. So you're building up, accumulating, and then you have a rest period where, the land is not worked. And it's kind of that similar thing in Japan where different areas of their forest is, you can go and get resources from it. But when it's having its rest period, you just go to a different area. Okay. So the deeper meaning of the original Jubilee is no system is meant to accumulate imbalance forever. Okay, that's really what we're looking at is imbalance, instability. And we're addressing that imbalance and instability. Hi, Mike. Mike's here. Okay. So Jubilee interrupts generational debt. It interrupts permanent dispossession. Okay. And then it interrupts endless extraction, which is a huge thing that we'll see how far I get into the conversation, but I went pretty deep into what was happening in 1726, what was happening in 1776. These are all Jubilee years. What was happening in 1826, what was happening in 1876, what was happening in 1926, and what was happening in 1976. Like what was going on, what were the key um, results of these periods in time, and what was it releasing, what was on the table that people as a society, as groups, what were they working on. Okay. All right, so moving into Christianity, spiritual jubilee, Christianity. So the Judaism was really looking at the land, looking at how people like the labor, the servitude, and looking at debt. So those things are getting released. So that was their form of release because you have to have these pressure relief valves, and that's basically what a jubilee year is like this big pressure release. Now we're going into Christianity where there's internalized jubilee, which is you can think of forgiveness as a form of spiritual jubilee, release from spiritual debt. Okay, so in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, is one of the verses in that prayer. So the release of spiritual debt is important in Christianity. The restoration of relationship with God is another jubilee. Like you just feel like all your sins are paid for, and it just has you feeling a lot better, a lot more connected spiritually. So you're able to like connect that way. And then really this liberation consciousness, that you're liberated and freed from the things that are weighing down internally for you. So Jesus essentially reframed Jubilee as spiritual restoration through truth and release. There's truth and release there. Okay. These are all themes of the Jubilee. So moving into Islam, rhythms of release and balance, and it's not necessarily called Jubilee directly. Islam greatly and strongly emphasizes debt ethics. So, like, usury is very much frowned on. In fact, usury is frowned on in Christianity, but it's heavily frowned on in Islam. Um, they also, Islam emphasizes charity, or zakat. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but economic fairness. So, having a fair playing field, release from excessive burden. So, if there's something that's excessively burdening, there's a release valve. Like I said, we're looking at these as pressure releases. And then cycles of mercy and restoration. The underlying idea in Islam is that wealth and power must remain morally accountable. So that's like a nice big theme of their rhythm of release and balance. Okay. Now, in Eastern traditions, so think like Hinduism and Buddhism, their parallel principles, you can think of these as karmic cycles, release from attachment. So, really like embodying detachment, which is important, to like help release that. Restoration through balance. So, think like yin and yang, and then ending repeating suffering loops. So, they don't really label it as Jubilee, but these are release principles that are helping restore and recenter. Okay. It's a bit of liberation from maybe some cyclical bondage that you might be feeling, which is quite possible. I think we as a society might feel a little bit of that looping or that repeating cycle where it's like you kind of feel like this heaviness, and then having a jubilee moment is like a feeling of release, a feeling of freedom, a feeling of restoration in that. Erica Gonzalez says hello. Hello, Erica. Thank you. If you guys are not subbed, please throw me a sub, a like. Um, but it helps my algorithm to reach more people, and it's free, and I appreciate that. And we just talk about deep subjects, eventually becoming time travelers. So, how cool is that? Okay, so Jubilee, let's look at it as an archetype. Okay, so we're kind of moving away from the religious part of it into this universal meaning piece of it. So, Jubilee is basically, you can think of it as a societal exhale, just like a calm reset, very nice. It can also be seen as correction after excess. So, I don't know about you guys, but sometimes I get a little overwhelmed just being an American and having all of the things at my fingertips that I can either get online, go to a grocery store. I mean, immediately when I think of something, I can figure out 4 to 5 ways to get that thing. Maybe even more if I think about it. 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon for anything that you like. It's less than six. Is it 7 degrees or 6 degrees? Is it 6 degrees? I can't remember. It was a little like 1990s game. But anything that I can think of, it's like I can go online, type it in, and I think there's rare moments where I can't find the thing that I'm looking for. Like today, I was looking for, I know that they make them. They're like these, uh, cone shaped compost buckets or containers, and it's like open on the bottom, and you just place it on the ground and you throw all your food scraps in there. And I was like, I know I've seen them, but I was having a hard time finding that exact model online. And I was like, I know that they're around, but you're killing me. I don't even remember what I said, but okay. So, Jubilee's collapse of unsustainable systems. So, some of the systems that are going on, think of our monetary system, think of our political systems, like not just here in America, but realm wide. We're looking at all of these systems being tested for stability. Are they stable? And then even like that's on a macro level. If we shrink it down into our own personal level, how is my identity stabilizing? Is it an unstable system that I'm existing in? And am I aware enough to see where the pressure release needs to go in my life in order for me to reestablish and restore into a system that I am able to be in. So collapse isn't a bad thing. It does hurt a little and it is uncomfortable, but collapse is breaking down an unstable system within yourself and as a society to bring forward something that's a little bit a little bit more livable. So when we look back at the fall of Rome, okay, the Rome was becoming huge, and for that time and the size of the empire, it was just big, okay? And with the fall of Rome, what really happened was now the Rome fragmented, and then now we just have these little areas where they stabilized in their own way. In fact, a lot of people didn't even know that the fall of Rome had even happened. They were still operating in that old system because it was so big, and we don't have the communicate they didn't have the communication style that we do nowadays, right? We can instantly get information, we can instantly buy something and add it to cart, and it will be instantly basically arrive. It could be like Instacart, it could arrive to you same day basically. But in the fall of Rome, they didn't have those mechanisms. It was still very much not even snail mail. You can't even say that. It, but the systems when that fell, they started to form together, and maybe they already had those little circles and identities that they were able to like be in. Um, and then finally, there's a release of inherited burden. So when I look at the debt of the United States of America, I'm like, who are we paying that to? What liability relationship is this? Like, who are we paying that to? And is that system so burdened, so unstable that at some point it just breaks? That's just an open-ended question. I'm not even going to theorize on what's going to happen with it, but that's something that I look at when I'm like, that is an inherited burden that either my generation, or my children's generation is going to need to come to terms with. How are we going to manage that? At some point, it becomes so unstable, it's going to collapse. And that is just life. Like, that's part of life. Okay. So Jubilee really asks, what can no longer be carried forward into past the threshold? Okay. What's no longer able to be carried there? Okay. Now we're going to look a little bit um, of Jubilee throughout history. And I'm not going to go deep to 1776, but obviously 1776 was a Jubilee year. It is a significant year. In fact, we're going to be coming up on the 4th of July, which is where that is observed. And it's going to be 250 years of the birth of America. Okay. But up until that time, there was a lot of tension. It was very scary. And, for people in that were really coming up to questioning these hierarchical systems that were going on, it wasn't just America that was having that discussion. At the same time, the French Revolution was going on as well in this time frame. So historically, that year was just a loaded, tense year where we kind of are in a similar situation in 2026, where we're in this loaded, tense year, and something is going to, cause that release. It's, you can only blow a bubble up. I play Mario Kart, and there's like this game where um, you're like blowing a balloon up, and it's like you have to move the controller like this on the switch, but it's like, how big is the balloon going to get before it pops, and you're trying to get it to be the biggest before it pops. But that's kind of how I imagine these, moments where it's like balloon that's filling up and up and up until at some point it collapses, or in the balloon analogy, it explodes. But let's look at 1926. Okay. So we're just looking at symbolic and historical patterns in history, and um, the symbols of each of these time periods of their Jubilee moments. Okay. I'm not like making any claims. This is just kind of a quick overview of what was going on in those moments. So in the 1920s, the mid 1920s looked very glamorous. Think of like the flapper girls. There was a lot of prosperity going on. There was a huge explosion in just different culture. All right. So people call the 1920s the roaring 20s because of that glamour and that prosperity that was really just kind of being indulged in. Okay. But underneath, there was a lot of speculation, there was inequality, there's social instability, and they were over leveraging systems. In the 1920s, you have, I think, was it the stock market? I know that in 1913, that's when the Federal Reserve came on board. And so underneath, like the 20s, you had all of this speculation. I remember reading The Gilded Age by Mark Twain, and I don't think I finished it, but I had enough. I have enough to understand a little bit of the gist of it. But The Gilded Age is basically you have something and then you cover it in gold. It's not really, so it looks golden, it's gilded, but it underneath it, it's not valuable. And that's kind of the air of the early 18th century, and maybe even late the late 17th century, is you have this like guild. So people are like saying that they have all of this wealth, but really they weren't. And one of the the story is really funny because there's this kind of lambastic big character. He's able to like paint stories, and really he's just like this charlatan, but he's like, oh yeah, I have all of this wealth. And then cut to him and his family eating dinner. They're all eating boiled turnips, and trying to like make a reason of, why am I eating these? Yes, thank you, Yahweh, releasing the burdens. Absolutely love it. Okay. um but soon after 1926, what happened? Soon after, there was the Great Depression, a huge financial reset. Okay. Money started to move away from being having gold and silver and copper as a way to like exchange energy, pay people into the dollar, okay, or what we know as the dollar today. So there's this massive financial reset. Yeah, it was really funny. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. Um, there's a lot of interesting comparisons from the Gilded Age to today. So it's interesting to see how history cycles and these principles like keep on rolling through. Um, and there's institutional distrust and then a restructuring of labor and economy. So at this time in 1926, unions are starting to become the thing. They're starting to talk about that and really like coming into it. Um, so the party, the glamour and the prosperity that people were experiencing often peaks, okay, right before the reckoning, right before the collapse. It's like a peak moment and then a collapse. And I think that's why people are feeling that in their souls, is like they know just in a inner knowing, okay, your heart knowing, your gnosis, the that this can't continue. It's unsustainable, it's unstable, and at some point it's going to collapse and break. Okay? Now let's jump to 1976. Okay, here's another big era of Jubilee year. And this is a time where there's a threshold between the industrial and digital eras. Okay, I talk a lot about the digital age. I did a whole series on the digital age, starting from the internet, which is this 1970s time period up until now, and just looking at the growth and arc of what is happening there. But in 1976, industrialization is still a huge era. So 1976 is flat between this, like in between period. The mid 70s carried with it economic stagnation, inflation. Okay. Are these themes sounding familiar? Oil crisis, aftershocks, oil crisis, institutional distrust, think like Watergate and Vietnam. Sound familiar? And then cultural fragmentation. Okay, that's the mid 70s. That's this Jubilee year. It's like very tense, um, very high energy. But it was also, at the same time, like we're going through the industrialization. At the same time, what's being birthed is the internet, the birth of personal computing, decentralization movements to like have our we need to decentralize, spiritual experimentation. Okay, things are shifting from in America, from being like strongly Christian to like really having these different waves and movements of spirituality. um I don't know if it was necessarily then, but like communes were becoming really popular. And then also in this 1970s, there's a rise of self-development culture. Okay. So this at this time in this Jubilee year, it was really just moving away from this old system into like and implanting these new seeds of the digital age that we're currently like right in the middle of. Some people call it the information age. I call it the digital age, however you want to describe it. At this in the 70s during this Jubilee year, it was like, okay, we're releasing this old frame and now we're going to enter into this new one. So we all entered into it a little bit complicitly. That's why I say, like, be very aware of your agency and what you're saying yes to, what you're saying no to. Okay. Because what you're saying yes to is planting seeds for the future. It's going to grow. Okay. Now let's move into 2026, which is where we're at right now. Okay. We're arrived. We're here. What's our current Jubilee threshold that we're in right now? Okay. So we can look at this very much symbolically, archetypally, we can look at it culturally, but we're not going to be like making claims. This is not a prophecy. We're just looking at these cultural comparisons, these historical comparisons from times before until where we are right now. Okay. And just because this is a Jubilee year doesn't mean like, oh, everything is going to explode right now. We're in an energetic like it's very much an energetic Jubilee that we're going into. Okay. So current signs of the Jubilee pressure, there's a few. We're going to talk about four of them. The first is economic. So the signs that we're in this Jubilee pressure moment is we have debt saturation. There's a high amount of debt. There's housing instability where housing prices are going up and the cost of housing is going up. The cost of living is going up and it's not keeping up with, you know, the way that we have our financial limits set here. There's wealth polarization, which in the 1920s, in that roaring 20s time, I every time I think of the 1920s, I think of The Great Gatsby. It was a book that I read and then I watched the movie. It was like a book to film class that I was taking, and so I always think of The Great Gatsby. And there's a couple different Great Gatsbys. You can watch one with um, Leonardo DiCaprio, which is a recentish one, or there's some from, older, uh, in the 1900s, like early 1900s. So there was definitely this wealth polarization. You were either rich or you weren't. And we can kind of look at that, like right now, the middle class is kind of getting thinner where it used to be pretty big. Hello, I have subscribed for you. Thank you, Janik. I hope you're getting a lot out of this. Okay, and then now economically, AI is restructuring labor. So we're going to see that restructure of labor happening as well. So that's a sign of a Jubilee pressure that is releasing. So the way that we integrate with AI, which is happening, it's happening right now. You can go online and AI is everywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be you're signing up for an AI chatbot. Like AI is integrated into all of these websites. And so you're seeing it restructure labor. Now, instead of getting a person in a chat, you might get an AI bot in a chat and it's going to try and help you to get the answers that you need to avoid having to talk to somebody in person. Now, there's still going to be people like me who like to talk to people about certain situations that you're going to go through. And so it's like, let me just speak to an agent, right? One question for you: how to learn English? The best way to learn English is just to listen to people speak English and like look up in a dictionary to see what the words mean that you don't understand. That's kind of how I try and understand what other people are saying. I can understand a little bit of Spanish, but there's some words where I have to look it up. What about taking for you? Like me teaching English? I don't know that that's in my wheelhouse. There's lots of people that teach English. I'm more of a math and science kind of gal. You know what I mean? Find the book in your language, fluent in 3 months. Oh, there you go. I'm from Nepal. Very cool. Okay, so those are the economic pressures that we're looking at. Now, the next one, the next area of signs that we're looking at is socially. Okay, so socially, what are the signs of Jubilee pressure that are being like targeted right now? Now, number one, I talk about this quite a bit, is identity exhaustion. People feeling burnt out, people feeling like they can't even show up, that they can't even connect to themselves. Identity exhaustion can also be you have your own identities and roles in your life. And now, with the digital age kind of integrating into our lives, now you have multiple different digital identities that you have to add into the internal identities that you might have, your external, like environmental identities, like interactions with your family, your friends, your workplaces. So all of these areas in your life, you have different identities for, and then your online identities. Maybe you play. I don't think people play World of Warcraft anymore. What are the people playing? Fallout, Roblox. Well, there's lots of other like multi online gaming platforms. Okay, so based on that, like you can have very much have identity exhaustion. You don't even know how to. You don't even know who or how to interact because you're just being fragmented. It's almost like if you ever watched Harry Potter or read the books, there's this concept of a Horcrux, okay? And the Horcrux is you can split your soul into these things, and so Voldemort is he split his soul like 7 times into these 7 different things. It was like there was one into the Elder Wand, one into uh just different things. And the final one was actually in Harry. Well, I just ruined it for you if you haven't ever watched Harry Potter, which is crazy or not. I didn't watch it until a couple years ago. But so when I look at that identity exhaustion, that is a social indication that there's a lot of Jubilee pressure. And I see that a lot online where people are like just burnt out, and they're talking about being burnt out because they're not being their own self. They're not living in their own agency of who am I? Okay, so identity exhaustion is one. And then, like, on top of that, I don't even blame these people. On top of that, you have this digital identity or identities that cause even more pressure that needs to release at some point in time. Okay, institutional distrust is like a common topic in all of these Jubilee pressure release. I'm a profession. I am proof my English. Uh, Sorry, Janik. I don't know how to help you. It looks like everyone is waiting for GTA 6. Um, my friend Queen of Eagles said, "Find in your language fluent in 3 months." The book is titled "Fluid in 3 months." Fluent in 3 months. Um, Okay. So you have this institutional distrust, which is always going to be this common topic of Jubilee pressure. Next, for social, we have relational fragmentation. Okay. Relational fragmentation can look like, um, different family structures, the way that your family interacts, because now, like, we've added this digital age into it. Remember, the 1776 was just planting that digital seed of the internet. It's before the internet, before email, before e-commerce, before AI, before online video games. Um, the the way that people interacted, it was like those in your town, you interacted with them. That was your world. there was very little fragmentation from that, unless you got, somebody was like, don't deal with that person. They're definitely not a, not a good influence or whatever. Okay. But now that we've expanded and we have like all this access, it's like, instead of focusing all of your energy and attention into your immediate, you know, radius of your town, now we can talk to people from Nepal. We can talk to people from, I think some Indonesians come on, some people from India. Um, there's people that live in Europe that listen to this stream. There's people in Australia. You like, now the relational interface is like this global, realm wide experience. So the fragmentation is a little bit deeper, where you don't even know who your neighbors are, right? Okay. And then the final, it's not the final, but the last one we're going to talk about is a decline in trusting old narratives. So, trusting old narratives, you know, it's safe and effective. 4 out of 5 dentists agree. Um, what are some other old narratives? I can't think of too many off the top of my head, but all of these, the declining trust, maybe, oh, here's a good one. Trusting the Democrats, trusting the Republicans, and like feeding this back and forth, like, oh, if only they got in, it'll be our salvation. Oh, if only they got in, that would be our salvation. And just kind of like ping ponging back and forth, but over time, like, you start to see the pattern and you're like, I don't even trust both of them now. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, I don't trust any of those situations. I only trust people that, I know who they are. So that declining trust in, like, oh, we're just going to believe everything that the politician's saying, that is kind of being brought back. Whereas, like, socially, you don't necessarily want to believe that. And so we're seeing that very much with Trump, is a good example of that declining trust. All right. So the next area of current signs of Jubilee pressure is going to be spiritual. So people questioning inherited systems. I am coming for all days. You're live. I am proof my English. That's awesome. Yeah, just listening to people speak English is a great way to learn the language. So spiritually, people questioning inherited systems. So, we have inherited this debt system. We've kind of inherited like the system of the grocery store. We've inherited the system of Amazon being kind of a place where we get stuff. We spiritually, we start to question these systems. And then if you go even deeper, it might be this generational trauma system of, maybe my family has heavy, an excess of codependency that generationally, I need to work through. So just kind of looking at different systems on different levels. It doesn't have to be in the physical realm, it could be in the spiritual realm, it could be emotionally. What systems am I believing, and are they true? Um, my my friend and I were talking a couple days ago about, milk being a place where you get, or a great way to get calcium into your body. And we were having this conversation, and she was like, "Oh, there's like, milk is not a good." The thing that she said was like, milk is not a good way to get calcium. And I was like, I don't know. And I started reading the nutrition label, and I was like, well, you drink a serving of this and you get X number, and that's 25% of the calcium that you need a day. And so I don't necessarily think that that's true. It's not the only way to get calcium, but I'm reading this nutrition label and it says that it's X number of micrograms or whatever. And so that was that was like a belief system that was kind of inherited. You keep on hearing it over and over and over again, and then you start to believe it. So when in the Jubilee years, you're questioning these inherited systems. Now, mine is just like this. That example was just kind of this light, fun way of questioning it, but it could go even deeper. Of like, what Christian principles have I been believing that need to be released, that aren't true, that need to be released? So you start to look at those things a little deeper. Uh, Spiritually, in a Jubilee year, there's also going to be a rise in individuation. Now, Carl Jung talked about this. Individuation is really just kind of being really in tune with yourself. And I've talked a lot about that in past episodes. So please go back and catch those. But there's going to be a rise of individuation because now you're um, really truly interacting with how am I in relation to this? The threshold moment is after a collapse, something new gets built, and it's just, whether you're doing it intentionally or whether it just happens and you're just kind of adapting to that situation. These principles are going to start to come up, and they may have already started coming up, and now you're just kind of like in the midst of it, or maybe you're kind of on this latter wave of that. Um, no matter where you're at in that, you're going to see these principles come up. In Jubilee years, spiritually, there's naturally a nervous system burnout period. And so that burnout is an indication. Burnout is basically your system just stops. Okay. I talk about my extreme nervous system burnout situation where I couldn't even lift my arms, a large motor movement. Okay. That rests here. I was so burnt out, I couldn't even raise my arms up to my keyboard at work. That's how burnt out I was. Okay. So if maybe yours nervous system burnout might not be as extreme as that situation, but there's a little lag between audio and video. Thank you, Mike. Um, so look at how your nervous system, when I started this podcast, I was talking about really setting the foundation. And once you set that foundation, then you can build the structure. And that structure is really looking at how is my nervous system? How is it interacting? Spiritually, where am I? Am I connected? Am I disconnected? Am I feeling dissociative? Do I not even want to participate? Um, do I not participate because my body is just shut down and it doesn't want to interact anymore? It just doesn't have that motor system ability to even want to get out of bed. Okay. But where are you from, bro? Where are you from? Okay. And then finally, spiritually, there's a search for meaning beyond consumption. So you might start feeling this like, what does all of this mean? There was a really great video a few years ago. It was I think a TikTok or something, a TikTok or a reel or an Instagram or whatever. And this girl is like very young, like mid 20s. And she's just, tears are streaming down her face. And she's like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I get up, I go to work, I come home, I go to sleep, and I basically repeat that. There's no meaning in my life. What am I doing all of this for? Okay. That was a huge topic, I think, in the 2019 to 2021. That was like, a lot of people were getting that message and trying to figure out, how is this hitting? And they were like, that's hitting like right on point. Okay. So there's this search for meaning beyond consumption, beyond providing labor to an employer, beyond, um, you know, coming home and then going to sleep, like, and not really having any meaning in your life. We need to have purpose and meaning in order for us to feel fulfilled. And that rise of individuation is really like part of that is intertwined in this, okay? US, oh, I live in Oregon, which is over by California. And then finally, our last topic is technological. So in this current sign, this is 2026 current sign, technology. As far as technology, we see this AI acceleration. Okay, AI acceleration. This right now, like the seeds that we're planting right now, are going to affect greatly the next 2020 or 2076 Jubilee year cycle. We're going to look back at 2026 and we're going to see like the whole pattern of what happened. And in 2076, we're going to have, you know, a different opinion about this. But right now, we're going through this AI acceleration. We're going through digital identity instability. Okay. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of people who are influencers who just can't keep up with that. Okay. And I talked about that last year, and this is um, awesome. Come visit. um, so you're going to see a digital identity instability, and I've thought a lot about it, and I could imagine that there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to kind of move away from that influencer sphere if they're in it. You might even see outrage come from that as well, where um, somebody has this certain identity that they're putting online, and then because it's not firmly grounded in who they are, like there's a little bit of dishonesty that comes into that, then the crowds that are watching will turn and have this mob outrage, this digital mob outrage online. And then finally, uh, there's going to be algorithmic influence over attention and perception. Okay. So, what does that mean? So, in 1876, we have this industrial age rollout. Okay. Post Civil War, now people are going expanding, physically expanding from being primarily on the East Coast to now going west. It had already been happening. Manifest Destiny had already been happening. But because of industrialization, people were going west for mining. So not just the gold rush, but we're talking coal, iron, all these resources. They're pulling it out of wherever. So they're going and they're staking their land. Okay. Um, I look at that and then I look at, okay, in 2026, what are we doing as far as what is influencing? Now, like I said, I'm not making any claims, I'm not staking any prophecy in this, but from what I see, okay, this is what I see, is that your attention and your perception, your emotions, your thoughts, everything about your being that makes you uniquely your own being is going to be farmed. Okay, they already do it right now. Think of the personalized algorithm that you get. So when you're on Instagram or you're on YouTube or whatever, it's looking at how long are you taking time to watch certain reels? How how quickly are you scrolling? Are you watching the whole thing? Are you watching it a few times? Um, it's it's taking that information, that aggregate information about you, and then directing different ads to you. Okay. So your attention is knowingly or unknowingly being farmed. Okay. So in 1876, it was your labor. It was your, how strong are you? Can you work? How long can you work in these mines? But right now, like, it's kind of shifted from being a resource pull from the earth into a resource pull from your emotions, your thoughts, and depending on how regulated or dysregulated you are, okay, that's what is being farmed right now. So it's gone from physical labor to now emotional and mental extraction. You're the resource. And I hope that lands. I hope that lands. So, right now, we're in this Jubilee moment where we are living in structural overload. Okay. We're going to start to see leaks in different areas. And that collapse is a natural process. It doesn't mean that the world is going to end. That's not for us to know. We're simply interacting in this realm, okay? And we're simply looking at, I'm simply looking at the patterns of what was going on then, what is truly going on now, okay? Um, and I can go even deeper into that. I went on a little bit of a rampage, intellectual rampage of what even further is going on to that, but I'll probably save that for another episode or another podcast. So how is Jubilee playing out personally? So now we're not looking. We don't want to look always societally what's happening. We do want to like check in every once in a while, but really, what we're doing is working on ourselves inwardly, right? So let's look at it inwardly. Personal Jubilee might look like ending inherited emotional contracts. Okay. I had to end codependency. It was very difficult. There was a lot of tears, but it was inheriting. I'd inherited this emotional contract that I just don't deal with the emotions. Okay. Personal Jubilee might also look like releasing survival identities. Releasing survival identities. If you've ever said to yourself, I can't relax, okay, you go on a vacation, you can't relax, your nervous system's out of whack. Let's figure that out. Um, I recently, my survival identity might be don't go out and interact, hide away. Okay. So I'm figuring out how do I release some of the tension? How do I reconnect with my heart and my body at the same time? So I started working out at a gym. I'm 9 days in, you guys. My best boxer. Oh, Mike Tyson. You guys are having a little conversation in the chat. I love it. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you. I'm very grateful for my audience. Okay, so personal Jubilee looks like releasing the survival identities, releasing the things that make you feel frozen, releasing the things that make you want to run away, and releasing the things that make you angry, that get you into fear, that get you into like get you emotionally charged into a lower emotional field. Okay, so really, personal Jubilee is coming back into your own being and releasing those identities. That if you're following along, go back and listen to survival adaptation. That episode is where I talked a lot about that. Um, Personal Jubilee also looks like dissolving shame based obligation. Okay, shame based obligation. What does that mean? Shame-based obligation might be like caretaking for people that you feel like if you don't do it, then you're going to be shamed. Okay, that's a way that I can look at that. But anything that really just makes you feel shameful, like figuring out what is the agreement, what is the contract that I'm working out here, and how do I dissolve that? How do I show up? Okay, so figuring out how to do that. Forgiving yourself for old timelines. So a lot of people might look at, oh, when I was younger, I did this, or when I was in this relationship, I was this way. And, or even now, you might be in a certain timeline and it might make you feel shameful or where you're just like very harsh on your own self. Where like self love cannot be in your body because you're just like, totally hating on a former version of yourself. But really coming into the Jubilee year will look like, okay, I was that way in that timeline and it served me until like I figured out the loop that was going on. Okay. And then just forgiving and accepting that part of yourself. Like I went through that and now I'm a new person. I have a new identity. I'm on a new timeline. And it's very much different than this old one. And then personal jubilee will also look like reclaiming energy from extraction loops. Okay. So there might be moments, you might even be farmed right now where you're in some sort of loop and just recognizing I'm being extracted from. So sometimes when I'm on the reels or I'm listening to like certain podcasts, I'm like, am I being extracted right now? What's what is the exchange here? So really looking at that and then reclaiming that energy. I did this with my finances. I was like, I'm paying X number of money to Verizon when I could be paying X number of money to this different carrier. And so I was like, okay, the energy here, I don't like it anymore. I'm reclaiming that and I'm going to redistribute where I'm spending that money there into different spaces. So, in that, I'm looking at how much financial exchange is going on here, how much financial exchange is going on here, and then if there's excess left over that is not going here anymore, how am I redirecting it? How am I taking the money that I'm receiving from my personal labor at work and um, reclaiming that energy because money is energy and putting it into different things. So what I did is I took the lump sum that I was paying to this carrier and now I changed it over to a new carrier where I'm paying much less and then got a gym membership and planning out, okay, if I go this route, then I can save this much money and I can apply that extra savings to these places. Maybe it's into my savings account. Maybe it's to pay off, agreements that I have. Maybe it's to get a personal trainer. All of these reclamations of that financial energy that I had in my life, I'm pulling and I'm managing it into something that is going to benefit my future. Okay. So that's what the extraction loop looks like. Are you with Verizon just because you've been a loyal customer for 12 years? Well, yeah, I was. And the value of having that relationship was not panning out just because I'd been with them for 12 years. They didn't care. Okay. Same thing with people pleasing. Are you people pleasing? Are you afraid to speak up for yourself and what you'd really like out of a situation? Because if you're not and you're just performing this extraction loop, Okay. And not reclaiming that energy and putting it back into yourself, for your own benefit. If you're people pleasing, nobody is going, oh, wow, remember that time that you did all those things for me? That was awesome. Like, I've never, in all my people pleasing years, I've never had anybody say, that was really great. Of maybe my best friend was really enjoying life because I like to do things. I'm a very much like an acts of service person. I like doing things for people. I go to her house and I'm like rearranging her closet, cleaning her kitchen, vacuuming everywhere, and just like doing all these extra things that she necessarily doesn't want to do. Right? It brings me joy. And I know she appreciates it because she's told me that. But for the other people that I was doing all this stuff for, they didn't recognize that. They just took it for granted. And it was just an energy leak. Is that people pleasing is an energy leak. So it ends up being an extraction from your own self. So having to retrain that people pleasing part of me into, okay, how am I integrating this back into me? And it's not narcissistic. It's not shallow. It's just when when I'm at my most individuated, my most actualized self, I'm an even bigger presence that can um, have more impact in really getting into that. So that could be a reclamation of energy and a restoration, okay, from those extraction loops that you're going through. So some questions that you might ask yourself as a personal jubilee is, what burden am I still carrying that no longer belongs to me? Okay? What no longer belongs to me? What burden am I still carrying? And the jubilee year, that personal jubilee is time to like release that. Give it to Jesus. Like let it lay to rest and cross the threshold into that new identity, that new whatever you've got to be doing, because we all have a purpose here. Another question is, what identity survives only through obligations? Okay. What identity survives only through obligations, and how do I release that? Another question may be, what patterns have become generational inheritance? Okay. For me, codependency was a huge one that was really tough. It was really tough to go through. And going through that meant going through like some serious grief processes of losing family members. Okay. And then having to like remove people from my life that were extracting energy from me because they were unable to have their own agency and like make their own changes. So, and it was very interesting. It was very isolating. There were lots of crying moments, but now I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have to inherit that. Now I don't have to send it off to my sons and like repeat that down. Now they can focus on a different area of generational inheritance. And then finally, a question you might ask is, what must be released for movement to return? Okay. Imagine coming up to a threshold and you stop. There's no movement. And you stop because you're afraid of the unknown, of what's beyond that. That's really kind of where we're at as a society, is what's going to happen beyond this. Now, there's a lot of people that are trying to organize and structure, this is how it's going to be. And maybe that's the way that it goes. But we all have to be in agreement in order to go there. Okay? Like I said, sovereign interiority is knowing the direction that we're going and coming up to that threshold moment and being able to move through it. That's why I started with that last week, talking about going up to that threshold moment, dealing with closure and the fear that comes up when we're dealing with closure, and how do we get beyond that and into the initiation of the new era. Okay. So, what must be released for movement to return? Once you come up to that threshold, um, sometimes if I'm going to be jumping into a really cold river, and I'm talking like 45 degrees, if I'm going to be jumping into the river, sometimes I'll stand there and I'm just like at this threshold of, am I going to jump in? And I know I'm going to jump in, but I go through this feeling of, in order for me to like move and actually make the jump, I have to like release this fear of, how cold is it going to be? Am I going to come up for air? you know, or is, because it's really like cold. And it's a huge jump from being, 98.6 degrees into 45-degree water. There's a lot of release that goes into that. So I like to think of that. There's other thresholds where you just kind of, you're stopped. And in order for that movement to return, what are you releasing? So Jubilee year is really about that release too. Okay. It's personal Jubilee. All right. So we talked about thresholds. We talked about that crossing. Let's see what we've got here. Ryan Bradley. River's fairly william so far this year in the Willamette Valley. Yeah. Oh, good night, Janak. Joshi. Ryan Bradley's here. We live in the same area and never met. It's so funny. Well, we've met online. Okay, so Jubilee is about what is getting released during this crossing, which is where we're at here. We're in this crossing moment, and you cannot enter a new era while dragging these expired structures, these structures that are like falling apart, um, behind you. You cannot bring those in. Okay, so you're going to start to see those release as well and those collapse as well. And just because those things collapse does not mean like the world is over. It's the world is just changing, okay? And it's just really being open to, what does that change look like? How does that change the financial structure of exchange? The energy is always going to be there. Just the mechanism that we measure that energetic exchange is going to be different, okay? It's not necessarily a scary thing. It could be, if you're open to that and you're looking at that, you can really position yourself really well. But if you're going to be afraid to even cross um, that threshold, that precipice into this, the and into the initiation of this new era, um, it, it's not going to be the easiest, because you're going to want to hold these old structures together. And I think it was in Pluto and versus the financial structure episode that I did, I really talked about the 4 different timelines of, where you could go. So in one timeline, you can still like hold on into this old structure, and you still might be operating into this old structure, which is like, you work, and when you retire, it's at the same company for your whole life. You're used to dealing in this kind of currency. You're used to dealing in this thing, and it's all a part of this old world structure. I don't want to call it old world structure, but it's this older structure that's just been there. Okay. And then you have people that, and it's, a growing population, but people that are already in this newer structure where, like, they have multiple streams of income, they have multiple ways of getting the things that they need. And, you're seeing it right now, but it's just gonna, like, that's very new. It's very new to be in that structure. And then you have people that are hybrid, where they're still relying on these older structures, and then kind of integrating the newer structure that's being built. So they're a little bit more hybrid in both of these situations. And then there's a lot of people that are just unable to cross. They're unable to see it. They're burnt out. They can't see beyond that. And they just kind of go through this logical motion of life, going forward and forward and forward, and just not really being in it. They're not present in their own bodies. It took me a long time to realize what that meant. So, if you guys are following me, if you're subbing to my channel, thank you. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about retro causality, which is really fun, um, because we're talking about direction. This is a whole unit on direction. And direction is movement in time, and retro causality is a quantum way of looking at the timelines, okay? So the Jubilee and retro causality, once you're able to be really well intertwined in this, and those old debts and identity release happens, the future orientation strengthens. So once you're able to let go of this old, okay, I don't need to be like this, that life doesn't have to be like that, right? Once you're able to get to that point, now you're able through retro causality to really orient your future and your past, okay? You're able to stabilize your timeline, and that timeline stabilization really depends on like how your identity is. Okay. And then new movement becomes possible. Suddenly, they talk about like the 5D. Suddenly, that 5D experience, all the possibilities, all the probabilities of things that can happen, you have access to now. And I understand that for a lot of people, that might be hard to process and imagine, but hopefully I'll give it some credence in my next podcast where we start talking a lot about that. So really, if we're looking at Jubilee plus retrocausality, the future cannot fully organize around you while your energy remains entangled in unresolved past structures. Okay? So, really, like becoming involved in restructuring the past and letting go of those old structures that are just cannot come into the new threshold. They cannot pass that threshold. They're just going to stay back there. And you can stay back with it and it will be tugging at you. But once you release that entanglement, now you can fully reorient, okay, and organize that future. Let's see how far I got here. So much. What am I at? 93? Okay. So, how can Jubilee be applied today? So, looking at it practically, um, so first is personal application, just the debt consciousness. It's not just a financial thing, okay? It could be an emotional debt. It could be a guilt contract. It could be inherited obligations. Like these things can be holding you back as debts. It's not necessarily financial. Um, if you want to apply Jubilee, having a nervous system reset. Uh, so land was rested on the Jubilee, okay, and us as modern humans with the digital age, we're constantly 24/7 on. Like we could just plug into the internet. I guess that's what we're calling it now. We could just plug into the internet and it's 24/7. It's constantly, it's going, 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 going. If you work a salary, I've worked a salary job and I felt like I was always on. Like there was no rest. It was like I go home and then if something comes up, I'm like looking at my email, like, oh my gosh, this thing fell apart. How am I going to deal with that? Okay. So, really having like giving yourself space for nervous system resets, really having restoration moments, really slowing down any extractions that are going on in your life, any leaks that are happening. I had a gym membership for 2 years and it was only $10 a month to Planet Fitness. But I was sitting here paying Planet Fitness $10 a month for the last 2 years, plus whatever the annual fees are, and that was an extraction. And it's like, oh, it's just $10, okay? But over you know a couple years, you're looking at over a couple $100. Uh, That's a slow extraction. And I went and I closed that. And so and now I have a new gym that I'm going to, and I actually attend it and I actually use the facilities. And it makes sense for me a lot more than going to that other gym. Okay. So slowing down extractions, um, because those are taxing you, and it is certain, maybe it's minor, but it's still taxing you. So really just being really clear with your energy. And then, uh, nervous system rest is recovering from constant stimulation. Like I said, our devices make it so we can just have constant stimulation. There will be moments where I don't even look at my phone all day. It's great. I love that kind of day. All right. So just really having moments of quiet, really having moments of being really intentional, of being present, and um, figuring out what is my body saying. So my body for the last 4 years has been like, hey, go work out, go work out. Don't just buy the gym membership. That's not helping me. My body was like, you need to move around. So, I did things like I would go out dancing, so ballroom dancing, and go hiking every once in a while, but it wasn't with any regularity. And finally, um, when I was working, actually, this podcast helps me out a lot because the things that I'm talking about are things that I'm actually applying to my life. And so when I'm like, oh, okay, my body's telling me to go work out, it's like, all right, now it's the time. Now is the time. So I went and I joined a gym and I've been going regularly. And I've already noticed a great deal of my goals, which is to become more flexible. How am I doing? Over the last week, I've noticed, okay, you've become more flexible. Now your body isn't feeling so stiff, which is terrible. I'm like, having a stiff body is almost like having living rigor mortis. Not fun. All right. So another personal application is clean exchange. So reevaluating your work arrangements, your agreements, your labor, your value systems, all of these things, just really looking at, okay, in my work life, is this a clean exchange? Am I going to work being treated well and then being paid well? Is this a clean exchange for my energy? Any agreements? Have this agreement. Maybe maybe it's a relational agreement where you're in. Maybe you're married to somebody. Maybe you have a boyfriend or girlfriend. Maybe you have certain types of friendships. Really looking at all of these relationships that you have. Um, Maybe even financial agreements, like my little gym talk, all of these things, like just reevaluating all of the agreements. Am I using my agency properly in these? Okay. Reevaluating your labor, the things that you're doing. Are you getting paid for it? Are you being a people pleaser and doing it for free? Or are you exchanging energy? Is it a proper exchange? Is it clean? Okay. Are they asking for it? Or are you just doing it for them? Because if you're just doing something for somebody to be nice, but you have this ulterior like motive of like, oh, they're going to give this to me, like that's not a clean exchange. So really reevaluate that. Okay. And then finally, value systems. Just, am I living and integrating myself in and focusing on things that I value? Right now, my health is my value system that I'm prioritizing. I've done a lot of work spiritually, I've done a lot of work emotionally, done a lot of work mentally, but I have not done a lot of work physically to improve myself. So my value system is, let's bump that up a little bit. And, over time, that is going to help somatically even out some of the emotional stuff, some of the mental stuff. It all has to balance and be in harmony. So really looking at those exchanges. Um, so another personal application is community restoration. Entropy, yes, being in entropy and not in syntropy. Is it syntropy? No, it's Gosh, I watched this really great episode on biocharismas. Anyways, well, there's a word for it. So Jubilee reminds us that hyper individualism eventually collapses social coherence. Okay. We need to be coherent, not just in our own self, but we need to be coherent with our communities as well. Because we do need that social integration as humans. Okay. Individualism is great. However, like, being completely hyper individualistic will collapse your societal systems. Think about, certain friend. Think about an old job that you used to have, and like you were there and you had a really great community of people, and you're like, oh man, we're gonna, maybe you get a new job and you're getting paid more money, and you're like, this is great, and you still like want to have, over time, when you work at a new job, that old job relationships just kind of go by the wayside. Okay, that is a collapse of social coherence with that group of people. We need to be around people to entrain to them. So then, you build a new system. Now, if you're like a lone wolf type and you just like only, you don't do relationships with people at work. And so you just go to work and then you don't like integrate with your team. You're not building social coherence. So your interpersonal relationships are maybe they could be elevated a little bit, but they're just low in the moment. Okay. And that's a part of emotional intelligence. All right. Personal application number 5 and the last one. And then I'm probably going to, I need to go do some gardening. So, um, technological boundaries, really questioning your algorithm, and is it extracting from you, and what is it extracting from you. Now remember, I am posing a theory that your attention, your emotions, your thoughts, and your just general energy of being a human is going to be the focus resource in the AI expansion. Okay. So, really looking at now, how are the algorithms extracting from me? Am I paying attention to the influencer talking about self tanner? Am I listening to, like, how interested am I in all the Sonobello commercials or the GLP-1s, or what else is like a huge thing? Um, is it HRT? the hormone stuff. Like, I'm at a certain age where I just get targeted algorithmically with these ads, and some of them are odd. I'm like, I don't have pets, algorithm, and I keep on getting like all these pet ads, and I'm like, I have zero pets, but okay, the algorithm's doing its thing. Okay. The other technological boundary that you're looking at is the attention economy. The attention economy, meaning, what are you paying attention to? What podcasts are you watching? Are you watching the news? Are you um, paying attention to certain YouTubers, certain TikTokers, certain IG influencers? Okay. Where are you putting your attention? That is a huge economy. And I might argue that it's more valuable than actual monetary currencies is your attention. Um, it's an economy, all right? The other technological boundary that I want to bring up is digital overload. So really taking a rest from, it doesn't have to be for like a whole month. I mean, maybe if that works for you, then that's great. But just looking at how much time am I spending digitally online, working on a computer, even if it's offline, how much time am I integrating into that? And do I need to set a personal boundary with the way that that I integrate with technology? Okay. All right. Maybe I'll just get these done really quickly. Yeah, we'll be fine. It's a holiday. It's a holiday. Why the hecky not? So, looking at the shadow, obviously I look at the shadow. Have a good day of gardening. We're supposedly going to be getting some here later. Working on a drawing for the bookstore here in town that I need to finish. Been busy at a new job as of recent. Oh yeah, it's gonna rain. Hopefully it'll rain. But it's good to see you, Ryan. Ryan Bradley's in the house. Okay, so looking at the shadow of Jubilee, release can feel like loss, instability. It could feel like an ego death. There could be uncertainty. All of these things will come up. And it's important for us to feel into those things and not avoid those feelings. So, if there's something about the dollar system that makes you feel comfortable, really like looking at what loss am I experiencing here, and really going through those grief cycles of that. Um, so the systems of the grieving process, these systems that we're so used to integrating with, were built on extraction, and they will and can resist any resets. Okay. We have certain relationship with physical money, but really it's an energy. We need to look at like deep down the energy of that. Okay. Now, if you're attached to old identities, it can also resist that release process as well. Okay. Jubilee is not passive. Okay. um, it's not passive, meaning it's not some sort of magical rescue. Okay. Put that out of your mind. It's not a magical rescue. It's not a salvation moment. It's it's a moment to be celebrated, but it's like the ending, the closure celebration. Okay. Jubilee is also not bypass. Okay. There's things that you still need to attend to while you're going through the Jubilee process. And Jubilee is not an avoidance of responsibility. All right. Jubilee is a conscious participation in restoration, a conscious participation in restoration. Okay. In these Jubilee moments, in these collapse moments, you will see themes of like apocalyptic destruction, and you'll also see kind of the opposite side of that of salvation, like people seeking salvation, trying to find saviors outside in their external world. Maybe they think it's a politician, maybe think it's this person, maybe think it's that person. Okay, so really looking at Jubilee as a conscious participation in restoration. How are you consciously moving through this Jubilee year and really accepting responsibility, um, looking at all your fears, looking at all your old identities, and really like having your kind of come to Jesus moment on all of these situations? Are you holding on to them because they give you some sort of value, or are you holding on to them because you don't want to let them go? And these are both situations that you can feel. And there's probably a lot of other emotions that you're going to go through as well. Okay. So, tomorrow we're going to be talking about retrocausality, and that is really what the future brings after reorganizing, after organizing afterwards. After, it's going to be talking about that initiation step and then how that future is going to orient for you. So, Jubilee at the end is not a destruction of life. Okay. It might feel that way because the fear that we're experiencing, fear just always ends up in fear of death. Okay. If I don't eat, if I don't go to work, then I won't eat and I won't have a place to live. And if I don't eat, I'll die. If I don't have a place to live, I'll have to live outside, and then I won't have the resources that I need, and I'll be subject to the elements, and then I'll die. Okay. Really, like every fear can just be drilled down of, why do you have that fear? Why do you have that fear? Why do you have that fear? It's because you fear death. Okay. We're told not to fear anything. And so Jubilee is not the destruction of life. Jubilee really is the interruption of what was never meant to continue indefinitely. Okay. We Things need to cycle through. Okay. Some of you are not being punished. It's not about being punished. You're being released from these timelines that your soul can no longer survive inside. Okay? It's like your soul cannot survive in that. If you're feeling dissociated, it's because your soul is not in it. It's like, I can't handle this. I'm out. Right? So let's really just kind of come back to ourselves. All right. Well, that was almost 2 hours. I love you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining. This has been episode 68. We're talking about Jubilee consciousness. And please like and subscribe if you have not already. And join me tomorrow at 5:30 Pacific Daylight Time. And we're going to be talking about retrocausality, really looking at the future orientation and organization of how that's going to look. Yeah, thank you guys for following me. If you are so inclined and you feel good about it, please go buy me a coffee. My buy me a coffee link is on my YouTube. And I will see you guys tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm going to go play in the garden.